boy, Hennythemoor, reporting live from the liquor store, man. How's everybody doing tonight? And hey, I know we opened the door to the liquor store a little earlier today, but I couldn't stay away from y'all, man. So not only are we back, but I'm back with a special guest inside the liquor store today, man. And it's that boy, Professor O, man. How you doing today, brother?
I'm good. Good. I can't complain. Happy to be on with you. What's up,
Hey, I
everyone?
I appreciate that, man. So, real quick before we get into our usual, opening, take the time to let everybody know who you with, where you're from, what you do, man.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, again, excited to be on with you. This is it's gonna be a fun show. But my name is Professor O. You can find me on Twitter at Professor O underscore NFL. I write for Cowboys Wire, which is part of USA Today. Do advanced analytics, pregame matchup, statistical articles covering EPA, VOA, toxicity, adjusted net yardage per attempt, and fun stuff like that. If you don't know what that stuff means, don't worry. Check out the article, and I have it in there for you. And I'm part of Pick Six Sports. So we're going to be kicking off our new season of the show, I think next Friday. So excited to have that coming up. So it's been the off season, so we're taking things a little bit slow after the heavy draft grind. So here we are.
Indeed, man, indeed. But hey, real quick, man, everybody on the way into the liquor store, y'all got a couple things to do for your boy, man. First and foremost, I need y'all to hit that like button for me, man. Because if you hit that like button, we can finesse this algorithm and more folks will find their way inside the liquor store. Secondly, after you hit that like button, you hit that share button. By hitting that share button, you alert the rest of the folks that patronize the liquor store that the liquor store is open for business and they can come in and put in their orders. And then thirdly, I need you to slap the shit out of an Eagles fan, man. Because if you slap the shit out of an Eagles fan, you will receive half off all the merchandise inside the liquor store. And we got what you need to succeed, man. We got hen, we got gin, we even got cowboy readers and the dreaded Eagles tears. We've been holding on to them since February. They getting strong, they getting potent. It's damn near a step down for crack at this point. It's so strong. But, we got that. You want to put it on your shelf as a collector's item, man. And hey, I see folks sliding in here right now, man. Bruce got the toxic juice. It's too easy. Tavis Banks said, "What's good with you, Professor O?" Jose, I see you. So yeah, it's gonna be a fun little show, man. It's gonna be a fun little show. So without any further ado, man, let's go ahead and jump into it. So I'm gonna start off with your thoughts about this, man. When you hear the Dallas Cowboys switching not only their passing concepts because they want to implement more West Coast principles, more West Coast concepts, like what Mike McCarthy used to run in Green Bay, like Brian Shanahan ran in Seattle. And you also hear that they're switching from a gap style run scheme to a zone style run scheme. What are some of the things that you expect from the Dallas Cowboys going into the 2023 season schematically?
Yeah, no, good question. So this is something that should be exciting for all Cowboys fans because, I don't want to knock on Kellen Moore too much because we've all done that plenty, but there are certain issues with the passing concepts that receiver after receiver complain about, analysts complain about, media complains about. I mean, we ran way too many stop routes. So seeing less hitches, less comebacks, less curls, things like that, and more routes that are going to hit receivers in strides. So seeing more slants, shallow crosses, drag routes, dig concepts, things like that. Like that's what I'm excited to see because you get the playmakers the ball in motion. So they're able to take it, use their athleticism, and turn upfield versus stopping and then starting. So I'm excited to see that. In terms of the run game, I mean, there's a lot of things, and I don't want to divulge too much because we're going to talk about it throughout the course of the show. But getting into some of the zone blocking schemes, specifically the inside zone, which is what Schottenheimer and Mike Solari, the offensive line coach, likes to do, is exciting because Dallas last year ran inside zone 20% of the time versus what Schottenheimer did in Seattle, which was 41.1% of the time. So it's a big difference in the amount of inside zone concepts you're going to see. So when you're talking about inside zone, you're thinking of things like GH counters, GT counters, wham concepts, things like that. So you're going to get a lot of offensive linemen trying to move the defensive line out of the way and then getting to the second level. So that's exciting, and there's a lot of opportunity for the Cowboys to attack defenses differently than what we've done previously.
Right. And I agree with you, man. And not only, just, schematically, but like concept wise, like play usage. We know that Dak Prescott is one of the better quarterbacks when he utilizes play action. If I'm not mistaken, for his career, it's like 48 touchdowns to 11 interceptions, slightly over 68% completion percentage. But, when Kellen Moore was the play caller, I don't think there was ever a season where Dak Prescott was in the was like top 5 in play action usage. So, and knowing Brian Schottenheimer, there was never a season in Seattle where Russell Wilson had less than 139 play action attempts. So, I'm curious to see, what the numbers on that will look like going forward. Because we know that they want to run the ball. Like he had the number 1 rushing offense in 2018, number 4 in 2019. So I'm curious to see, how they marry the play action with the new power with the new run scheme. And I want to see they actually let Dak Prescott utilize one of those concepts that's actually his strength. But I really don't know though, because I would be happy, if they did that. But I still have my questions. When you hear them say that they're going to use 70% of what Kellen Moore did, not to say that Kellen Moore did not have some good things. They did average 30 points 3 years straight. But when you hear that they want to keep 70% of what Kellen Moore did, did that give you any pause or what?
I see where you're coming from, and I think that's a valid response. But at the same time, if you look at what we were able to do in totality, we were one of the highest flying offenses. We scored a lot of points, picked up yardage. So using things that were effective and keeping that, I like. Some of the things that I want to see differently from both Schottenheimer and Mike McCarthy is, if you look at last year when the Cowboys were in 11 personnel versus 12 personnel, there was a huge discrepancy in the pass run ratio out of 11 versus 12. It was basically how you would think we would attack. So in 12 personnel, we were run heavy. In 11 personnel, we were pass heavy. So when you're seeing that and the Cowboys are rolling that out 60-70% of the time, defenses are already cued in. They're probably going to pass based on the data. We know what they're going to do out of 11 personnel. Then when we bring in the extra big bodies for 12, and now we're running 65% of the time, that's a huge swing. Right. And if you look at what Schottenheimer did in Seattle and Mike McCarthy when he was in Green Bay, it was a lot more consistency. So whether the 11 was a little bit higher or lower, it didn't really matter. They still were relatively balanced in how they attacked out of 11 and 12 personnel. So things like that, even small little differences, that may be where the 30% comes into play, is just running attacks out of those formations. And like you mentioned, play action is huge. Dak thrives out of play action. You mentioned the overall play numbers and just some statistical data to kind of, piggyback off what you said. But over the 3-year span that Schottenheimer was in Seattle, they ran play action the 8th most in the league. It was 28.4% of the snaps. And again, play action is a beautiful thing because all it does is that fraction of a second that it freezes the linebacker or the safety in the box, that they can't drop into the coverage or they can't immediately go to the receiver because they think you might be running. In play action, one of the myths that you hear in play action all the time is you got to run the ball effectively to run play action. You really don't. There's tons and tons of data out there that you really can't run too much play action. The first time you run play action, in the 18th play you run play action, this is data going all the way back to 1980, has almost identical success rate because the defense has to freeze and honor the pass game. And when you do that, it opens up things for the run game later on when you do like a delayed draw or something out of shotgun. And then you can do the same thing coming back in the passing game by making them freeze on the run. So, when you're looking at running more in the West Coast, West Coast, Texas Coast, whatever you want to call it,
right?
Drag routes, shallow crosses, digs, slants, things like that are quick hitters. If you can freeze those linebackers for just a fraction of a second, that opens up the alley for you to hit that play. You get CeeDee Lamb, Gallup, or Cooks in stride, and you can make defenses pay. So I'm excited to see how they do that. But yeah, good question. I mean, what the 30% is that's different, I don't know. One thing I do want to kind of toss out there, because I haven't heard anybody else talk about it, is Schottenheimer, 3 consecutive years in Seattle, ran either the most or the second most 10 personnel of any team in the league. So maybe that's something we see more of. Maybe 1 back, no tight ends, 4 wide receivers, something we haven't done at all for the Cowboys haven't really done over the last 3 years. Maybe we see a little bit uptick in that.
Well, I mean, when you look at the track record of Mike McCarthy with tight ends, and you look at Brian Schottenheimer's track record with tight ends, they're not really utilized in the pass game unless you got like a dog. Like people always point to Jermichael Finley, like, oh, he had this many targets, he had like 80, 90. Look at the targets when he got hurt, right? When he was hurt or he couldn't play or he wasn't there. Like it was a drastic difference in between the distribution of the ball between the other tight ends and like Jermichael Finley. So, just from the track record, when he has a stud, he'll give him the ball. When he doesn't, then, they just get in where they fit in, and he goes with a lot of 3 wide, 4 wide receivers. Really, when they won their Super Bowl back in 2010, it was mostly 3 wide and 4 wide. That's how you saw James Jones eat. You saw Jordy Nelson eat. You saw, all these different wide receivers, make plays for the Packers, in the playoffs. That was in the absence of Jermichael Finley. I believe he got injured that year. So and if you look at Brian Schottenheimer, like I don't think his 3 years in Seattle he had a tight end reach 500 yards. So it's not like it's going to be 100 targets like we saw with Dalton Schultz this year, right? 100 targets. The year before, 800 yards. I don't think we'll get that kind of production from our tight ends anyway, just because of what they want to do schematically.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And if you look at the receivers, year 2 from the ACL injury, so we should see a better Michael Gallup. All the talk so far from OTAs and minicamp was you're seeing some of that explosiveness back, and he's trusting his knee a little bit more, planning off of it, and you just see that pop in his step coming back, which is good. Then you add a Brandon Cooks to the offense. I mean, a little bit more 10 personnel makes sense. Running 11 personnel makes sense. And again, when you do run 12 or even 13, which, Mike's done that in Green Bay. We did it last year. So even when you see that looks, as long as we balance it out a little bit more, I think we're in good shape. And another thing to mention about Schottenheimer is he ran the ball on first down 51.5% of the time. Mm-hmm. Pretty balanced. Last year, the Cowboys ran on first down 57.5% of the time. So a little bit higher than what you probably want to see. And again, when you hear Mike McCarthy talking about wanting to run the ball more, what does more mean? Is that just a percentage increase? Is that a total carry increase? Is it just the way that they're running, being more effective versus actual quantity? We don't really know what that means, because last year the Cowboys were pretty balanced in run-pass ratio, but there were games where it got out of whack. So maybe that's what he means, just being more consistent across the board. So it's really fun to talk about this and it's interesting because Kellen Moore, overall, we were a successful offense, but we were lacking. There was definitely conceptual issues, schematic issues, consistency issues. And if these two guys together can kind of marry that offense together to be a more cohesive unit, I mean, the sky's the limit for that offense.
Right, because hey, you talked about like they listen, but people don't understand. We were like one of the most run-heavy teams in the NFL last year. If I'm not mistaken, we were like 5th in rushing attempts. But like when you look at efficiency, we only averaged like 4.3 yards a carry. That's like 19 the entire league. And granted, I understand, once the Terrence Steele injury happened, the ability to run the ball with both running backs was, compromised. I think there was at one point the Dallas Cowboys were averaging like 2.3 yards a carry after the Terrence Steele injury. So, I think those numbers are sort of skewed, but at the same time, we know situationally there were games where Kellen Moore could have won those games had he just stuck with running the ball once you already had a substantial lead. So even for people that don't truly believe in running the ball, a lot of people believe you're supposed to run the ball to at least end the game. And there were instances in like Green Bay, you had a lead. Even after Green Bay went down there and scored, you had a lead. You could have leaned on your run game. You were running at an effective clip that game to salt that game away. Jacksonville Jaguars game, in hindsight, if you had just ran the ball on that third down, they would have had to use their final timeout. They might not even get an opportunity to get into field goal range, or go into overtime for that Noah Brown deflection pick 6 to happen. So, when you just think about those little, and listen, he had a decent game up to a situational point. I think a lot of what people give Kellen Moore a hard time for is situational football, and him not knowing when it's best to score and not knowing when you're trying to salt the game away and get first downs. At the end of the game, when you have a lead, first downs are way more important, than getting points. Because they never get the ball back. It doesn't matter what the score is.
Right. Yeah. And there's definitely validity to that too. There were games like you mentioned; those are both good games to highlight. So it's going to be interesting to see how they balance things out. Mike McCarthy said, I'm not interested in lighting up the scoreboard, which makes you think it's going to be more of a ball control offense. But at the same time, every offensive coordinator wants to score points, and every offensive player wants to score points. So
right.
What does that look like? How do they balance that out? And there's ways that you can do that, especially as you mentioned later in the game. You can kind of up that run tick ratio. Or just be smart and say, hey, we're probably not going to pick up a first down here. Let's not try to get the entire yardage. Let's just get the ball in motion, screen, check down, whatever, to get the ball moving, try to gain some yardage. And if you can pop a big play, great. But at the same time, it's going to keep the clock running versus an incomplete pass, which stops the clock. Like small situational things like that can make a difference too. And screen game is something we haven't talked about yet too. Cowboys have not been a good screen team the last few years. Can we improve on that? Because if we can, that's some easier conversions that you should be able to pop big plays, especially with, we've seen Michael Gallup do that in the past. We've seen CeeDee Lamb do that in the past. So we can get those guys with the ball in their hand with blockers in front of them in space. I mean, we should be able to cook. And is this the year we finally use Tony Pollard as a receiving back? Like, can we finally do
Man,
that? All of us have been begging for it. This is not something you have to be like a football guru to do. Like, you can see how athletic this man is and how explosive he is with the ball in his hands. Can we get him in space? Can we make it easy for him?
man, Tony Pollard literally had more wide receiver snaps and more and kick return snaps in college than he did at running back. So I don't understand why they never utilized him. But you would hope moving to a West Coast system where they and listen, they used to call it a long handoff for a reason. You will see them throw the ball to the running back a lot, especially when nothing's there. They will have plays designed for it. They'll run a Texas route out of the backfield for a running back, especially somebody like Tony Pollard, who is definitely a matchup nightmare. But to get back to your point about screens, you know what I'm saying? Like, I got this little graphic up here. You know what I'm saying? If you look at the very bottom, these are all the attempts on screen that Dak Prescott has had his entire career. He only had 34 in 2016, only 29 in 2017. I think 58 in 2018, 36 in 2020 in 2019. I didn't count 2020 because he was injured, of course. 2021, 60 attempts, and last year, even though injury, he only had 27 screen attempts in 12 games. So, not only were they not very good at it, they didn't even try it. They didn't even bother doing it. So, I would hope, especially now, Tyron Smith is supposed to be healthy right now. There's been talks about letting Tyler Smith play left guard. So, hopefully you will have the athleticism on the offensive line to be able to run an effective screen. Because, hey, it's a layup. I'm not saying that Dak Prescott is Patrick Mahomes, but last time I checked, last year, Patrick Mahomes was top 10 in both screens and play action usage. So if it works for Patrick Mahomes, who the baby goat, it should work for Dak Prescott, right?
You think so, yeah. And another way that we can utilize him in the passing game, too, in addition to just screens, is when you talk about West Coast, mesh concepts is a huge portion of what teams do in the West Coast offense. Texas Coast, First Coast, whatever you want to call it. The Dallas West Coast, Midwest Coast, I don't care, whatever you want to call it. Part of that, though, is there's a variation of that called a mesh rail. So for those that don't know, basically the difference in a mesh and a mesh rail is in a mesh concept, your running back's typically running a flare route, so you're getting him into the flats. In a mesh rail, he's essentially running a wheel route. That's what the rail is. So you can get Tony Pollard in space versus a linebacker, a strong safety with a bad angle, and you let him use his athleticism. So think shades of what we did against Minnesota, where Tony Pollard had his big reception. Mm-hmm. More of that in the offense. And again, that doesn't have to be a huge portion of it, but just getting him in space, use Vaughn in space, Malik Davis in space, like guys like that, they could take advantage of their speed and athleticism and ability to break tackles versus a linebacker or a strong safety or even a cornerback, because they're going to have a size advantage there. So that's something I'm excited to see. And again, when you talk West Coast, you talk mesh. That's a big portion of what they're doing. So mesh rail should definitely be a concept of it. And we've been begging for years for wheel route. Like run a wheel to Peyton Hendershot. Let him get upfield in space. Same thing with the running back. So yeah, there you go.
So you talk about one like this, right? Similar to this. Well, this is a mesh concept, but I don't think it's a mesh rail, if I'm not mistaken.
It's similar, but that slot on the inside would be your running back out of the backfield. So it's very similar. So you're getting everybody coming inside, and then you have that one guy one-on-one on the outside, which would be a running back Pollard in this situation. But yeah, very similar.
Right, but speaking of mesh, man, not only the opportunities to get Tony Pollard in the mixed match, there is supposed to be a natural pick, in some instances with a mesh route. So imagine if one of those guys that the defender gets picked on to somebody like Turpin, who was probably your fastest wide receiver, or Brandon Cooks, who's a 4-3 guy. So like you said, mesh is probably going to be a staple in this offense. I would hope so, especially with now the Dallas Cowboys have speed. I could be wrong, but is this not the fastest team the Dallas Cowboys have had in years? You just go. It gotta be, because look, Turp like a 4-2 guy, Brandon Cooks like 4-3, Tony Pollard ran a 4-3 his pro day, Jalen Tolbert a 4-4. You picked up Tyron Johnson on the practice squad, who a 4-3 guy. He might be able to wiggle in somewhere, maybe. So I don't know. There's a bunch of guys on here that actually have some speed to them, and no knock against anybody else that we had in the past. We appreciate all y'all. But, a lot of times the Dallas Cowboys, flood the field with 4 or 5 guys. They flood the field with 4 or 5 guys a lot of times. I think this is, one of the few times where you have guys that really fit into the West Coast system. Run after catch, vertical threats, guys you wouldn't mind throwing a jailbreak screen to. So, I do think that we're on the right track, at least personnel wise, for guys that can fit inside of a West Coast system. But I have a diverging question for you to get back to this zone run scheme that we were talking about. Do you think, outside of Tony Pollard, do you think the other running backs fit, a zone run scheme?
So that's interesting because I'll just answer first and then I'll give you the explanation behind it. Yes, I do. So I think when people think of zone runs, especially inside zone, you're thinking when you're running the ball inside, you need that power back. You need that big body, this guy that can break tackles. But the way that the blocking schemes are drawn up in a inside zone, you don't really need that. A lot of colleges run inside zones with small feedbacks because again, you're running a lot of counter, running a lot of wham, misdirection. And when you do that, all they need is a small crease. Really, what inside zone blocking needs is not necessarily a speed back or a power back. It's a back with good vision. So as long as your backs have good vision and can make a quick decision, typically you're looking to try to cut on that guard's outside hip if possible. But if that's not open, obviously cutting back inside. So if they can break tackles, that's great. But really, you're looking for somebody who has good vision. If they have good vision, it doesn't really matter their size profile. So I think that's interesting too, because when we talk about running backs and you look at the running back room, it seems like there's, aside from Hunter Lipke, and I guess Ronald Jones a little bit, a missing body type in that room for what fans want. And that's what I would like to question you on a little bit too, if you don't mind. I know it's your show, but let me ask you a question.
Go ahead, brother.
Thunder and lightning. So that's something people talk about all the time. You want thunder and lightning with your running back room. I don't think you need that. I think that's something fans like the idea of, but it's not really something you need. Like if you look at the running backs for the Super Bowl teams for the last decade, you don't really need that 235-pound guys just trucking guys. Like you can win with multiple small speed backs if your blocking is sufficient. Now, if you don't have good linemen, then obviously having that power back that can break tackles is great. But if you have elusive backs that have good vision, I think you can cook even with the running back room in the club we have. What are your thoughts?
Man, my thoughts about the running back room is my same thoughts about the wide receiving room. I look at my wide receiving room like a basketball team. I want guys that can do a little bit of everything at their position. On basketball team, you got a point guard, shooting guard, power forward. You got your 3-point specialist. You got somebody go try to shut down Kobe. So
guy.
Yeah. So on our wide receiver room, I think it's built like that. You got your primary guy. You got your primary scorer in CeeDee Lamb. You got your speed guy in Brandon Cooks. You got your possession guy in Michael Gallup, and you go down the line. And running back room, similar thing. And even though it might work, like you said, there's been instances, like you said, we seen it work before. But I treat it just like a gun or a condom. I would rather have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. So that's my mind frame with the running back room. So because if, like you said, there's been plenty of times in the modern NFL where we've seen guys eat. But I will also say this about the zone run scheme. Even though there have been small, quick guys that have ran it well and been successful, Marshawn Lynch played in the zone run scheme and he went pretty damn hard to me. So it's possible. Like you said, most of the time it's division because with the zone run scheme. Because the offensive line is flowing play side, there will always 9 times out of 10 be an opportunity to get to a cutback lane. So as long as you have vision, you can get back to that. I'm pretty sure you can feast in the zone run scheme. So do I want them to have a power back? Yes, but I will. What I will say though is I am willing for training camp and preseason to play out before they address it. If they have somebody on the team already, like they might like Hunter in a short yardage situation to give him the ball. They might, feel that Malik Davis, who by the way did play in a zone run scheme in Florida, can take a majority of the running back 2 snaps. They might come away feeling that. I might let them live with that. But if they go out there, and they look bad in preseason games, and a lot of the guys that are tackling them are going to be CDL truck drivers and podcasters like me and you, right? A lot of them guys don't actually make it. So they go out there and struggle against them boys, or they look bad in practice, then they need to be on the phone with somebody.
Well, and that I think that makes me feel a little bit better about it too. Is I'm looking at the names that are still available. There's a lot of guys that fit that mold or could complement the running back room that we already have available. There's plenty. I mean, the big names out there, obviously, you have Dalvin Cooks. You have Zeke out there. You have Leonard Fournette. You have Kareem Hunt. I mean, there's a lot of running backs out there that could help the team. So if we need that, great. But again, when I'm looking at the running back room and I know how inside zone blocking schemes work and pretty good idea of how we're going to utilize that, I don't think you really need a thunder back. I mean, it's great if you have one, but I don't think it's as important as what people want. Again, in an ideal world, you would love to have a speed receiver and you'd love to have a 6'5" chain possession guy, but it doesn't always work that way because you have teams like Miami that have lots of small speedy receivers and they eat you alive. You have teams like Kansas City, again, small slot, a lot of that slot profile that are hard to cover in space and they can eat you alive. And obviously they have Kelsey, who's kind of the opposite of that mold, but it would be nice to have that. I don't think it's as big of a deal as people let on right now. So it'll be interesting to see. But again, to your point, if something happens in preseason or training camp, we're seeing struggle in the run game, call one of those guys up, bring him in.
Yeah, listen, I always give people an opportunity to succeed or fail, before I make my final judgment on something. Because, when you move into a new offensive system or you move into a new scheme, a lot of it is projecting, especially when some of the players are young or haven't played a lot. A lot of it is just strictly projection. So, I would hope that the Dallas Cowboys already have what they need to go to war, right? But like we said, there's plenty of time to get that taken care of, especially now with the way that they have the cuts done. It's damn near gonna be like a second wave of free agency with all the cuts that are gonna happen on one day. So there might be a dynamic guy, that's playing behind some proven veterans that you could at the running back position that we could bring in, to add to the roster. Before the season starts. So like you said, there are still opportunities if the running back room doesn't pan out. But I have a question, another question for you. And we've been talking highly about the pass game. We've been talking about this new zone scheme, but everything starts up front. So I'm concerned still. I feel comfortable going into the season, right? Because Tyler Smith's healthy. I like Tyler Smith for left guard. I don't think that Terrence Steele will be gone that long. And if he is, they've been speaking very high about Willisco. But, over the course of a 17-game season, with us having had offensive line injuries, in droves last couple of years, what do you think about the offensive line, for the 2023 season? Are you comfortable? Do they need another swing? Do they need another, swing guard? Do you think they need to add any more depth to the offensive line?
I mean, I honestly, I think all 32 teams in the league would love to add some depth on the offensive line. That's kind of the state of the offensive line around the league. Like you're hard pressed. There's a couple teams, but it's really hard to say this team has 5 good offensive linemen. And the Cowboys, assuming they can be healthy, which is a big ask with Tyron Smith's health issues, and obviously with Terrence Steele coming off of an injury, and even Zach Martin's been banged up the last few years. It's asking a lot, but the original best 5 that they're rolling out there week 1, assuming everyone's healthy, is probably one of the best offensive lines in the league. At the same time, though, from a depth standpoint, what do you have? So let's just throw the hypothetical out there. You lose one of the tackles, either one. So you kick Tyler Smith back to tackle, and now you have Matt Farniok, who didn't look good last year, coming off of an injury. You have Chuma Edoga, who played 1 game of guard. He looked okay for the Falcons last year in that 1 game. I think it was against the Bears. But that's it. He's a former tackle that the Cowboys had interest in previously, and they moved him to guard last year. So you look at the guard room, and it's not impressive. And then you look at the tackle depth. Josh Ball is now a guard.
Don't cuss me out like that. Bring up Josh Ball, man.
Yeah, so you have Josh Ball and then Matt Wilesco, who they're excited about, but he's a guy that's had shoulder issues too. He had it in college, had it last year, missed the whole season because of it. So they're excited about his growth and potential, but no, I don't feel great about the offensive line backups. But again, I think league-wide, a lot of teams probably feel that same way. I still would like them to go after like a Dalton Risner or somebody like that because there's still some good guards. I don't think he's a great guard, but he's better, at least from a depth standpoint, than what we have, and he started a lot of games in the NFL, so he would be nice. I don't feel great about the overall unit, but the starting 5 I feel pretty good about while they're out there.
So let me ask you, I have a pet cat, and I could be wrong on the kid, but what are your thoughts about TJ Bass?
So I actually like him. There's 4 or 5 undrafted free agents this year that I think have a pretty solid path to making the roster. Now, will all 4 or 5 of them make it? Probably not, but 3 or 4 of them may. He's good, man. So my first exposure to him, I'm I'm originally from Texas. I've lived most of my life in Georgia now, so I'm a Georgia Bulldogs fan. So week one, Georgia played Oregon, so I got to see him live in action against the Georgia defensive line, and he held his own, which is asking a lot because that defensive line produces first round picks all the time. I thought he looked pretty good, so I got to watch a little bit more of him as the season went on. Um, he's interesting. He's an interesting guy. And then Alec Lindstrom, we didn't mention. He was a guy last year as an undrafted free agent. A lot of fans like. He's a little bit undersized, but I like TJ Bass. I can see TJ Bass making the team.
Man, listen, and hey, you know, pointing out that he was the highest graded zone blocking offensive lineman in the NCAA the last 2 years. And, you know, we moving on to the zone scheme. You know, that's one of the reasons why I think he'll make it, because he already done played and succeeded in the scheme. And listen, I understand why he didn't get drafted. He's not the world's best athlete. Like, I could be honest with that. He's not the world's best athlete. But, you know, they're not asking him to play tackle either. They moved him to guard. He has enough physical size and strength to hold that position down, I believe. It's just going to really depend on how much Matt Fournier has developed, right? How much Matt Fournier has developed, you know, what they think about their other offensive line depth. But I think, like you said, I think he got a real good chance of making the team.
Yeah, no, he's a good one to bring up. What other undrafted free agents do you have your eye on?
Man, let's see. There's a couple of them, man. Really, the one I'm most interested in, I'm intrigued by is Isaiah Land. Because, you know, like, first and foremost, you never had too many pass rushers, but at the same time, like, he has some versatility too. I think people see those Gotti sack numbers. He had like 19 and a half 1 year, you know, down there. But, you know, they were able to move him all over the field, though. So, you know, like, he has snaps in the middle, he has snaps on the outside. So I'm really interested, you know, if he can make the team, and if he does make the team, like what positions would you know, Dan Quinn put him in? Because, you know, Dan Quinn is just like a chess player, and all these guys just chess pieces. He moves along the board. So I'm real curious about what he would do.
Yeah, Isaiah Land's a great one to bring up. And I'm sure you listen, but Aisha Morrison and Pat Walker both talked about DQ specifically lighting up when talking about Isaiah Land. I thought it was interesting that they had him running with the linebackers. I get it from like an athleticism standpoint, and he lined up all over the field. He's a guy I think could have an impact as a situational pass rusher. Obviously, you have a lot of pass rushers on the roster right now, so it makes total sense. Like, how can we get this guy on the field? You have a deep defensive end room as it is right now. And if you can get him on there as a linebacker and use some of that athleticism, that's good. So, yeah, he's definitely a name to keep an eye on, too. Hunter Lipke, obviously, all the Cowboys fans know about him by now. The Cowboys like him. Mike McCarthy's used the full deck. Now, it's not exclusive. We're not going to see, like, 20 personnel packages out there, like, 50% of the time or anything like that. It's going to be, like, 5% or less over your overall snaps. But there is a role for him in the offense, potentially. Darrell Johnson, I saw somebody in the chat mention. A guy that I don't hear anybody talk about is Miles Brooks. Have you watched Miles Brooks at all?
Man, listen, he's the forgotten man. I have not looked at anything in Miles Brooks. The moment we brought in Brandon Cooks and, you know, I had Jalen Tobin on the show, he lit up talking about this new offense. I feel like he's going to make a step, you know, in this season coming up. And then, you know, Turpin talk about, hey, I'm going to be involved in the offense this year, man, woo-de-woo. So all that, like, I didn't really think about him, man, because, you know, even Simi, you know, people talk about how good Simi looked. I really don't think, and I could be wrong, like, I could be dead wrong, but I don't think the kid gonna make the team.
Miles Brooks?
Yeah, I don't think the kid gonna make the team.
So Miles Brooks what's interesting for him is that cornerback room. So you're looking at the way that the cornerbacks are constructed right now, pretty solid on the top four overall. And you have there, and then you start looking at Kelvin Joseph, you know, former second round pick.
Oh, wait a minute. I thought you were talking about the 7th round pick we took out of South Carolina.
No, that's Jalen Brooks. Miles Brooks is the cornerback from Louisiana Tech. It's all good. Okay. Both are Brooks brothers. So yeah, he's a cornerback out of Louisiana Tech, but he's an interesting prospect. He had one of the lowest completion percentage over expected of any cornerback in the country last year. Really, really athletic guy. I think he's going to have a hard chance to make the roster this year. But I think he's a guy that could sit on the practice squad and maybe get elevated later in the season. But he's a name to keep an eye on.
Man,
but then we have Eric Scott, that was a draft pick. The cornerback room is fun to talk about too.
I was just going to talk about that, but man, think about it, man. Like, look at the Dallas Cowboys' top 4 corners right now, because they ain't moved on for Jordan Lewis. He's still there and probably be healthy. No, if he ain't healthy to start the season, I think he'll be healthy early on into the season. So you got Trayvon Diggs, you got Gilly, you got Deron Bland, then Jordan Lewis is your fourth corner. I don't think you can really throw out four better corners around the league, right? Going four deep.
Right.
And then you look at somebody like Israel McQuamon, who had position flex, right? Because he's played slot. They actually play outside before. He done played safety for them. So like he had position flex. Then who else? Well, I don't always buy off season hype. But they did say that Kelvin Joseph looked improved, during the OTAs.
Yeah.
Everybody looks good in the OTAs, but there are some guys, in that cornerback room that makes you wonder, the validity of some of these draft picks or undrafted free agents making it onto the roster, impacting the game at all during their first year. So
Good point. I'm just looking at it as I'm looking at it from like a long-term play because the names that we talked about, especially the latter half of that group, you have Jordan Lewis last year of his contract.
Yeah,
is he going to be back after this year? Probably not. Then you have Kelvin Joseph. If he doesn't step through the door this year, he's probably gone. You have Nashawn Wright. Is he going to make the roster this year? I don't know. We'll see.
How do you bring Nashawn Wright up?
Then you have CJ Goodwin, who's kind of the perennial cornerback, but really just a special teams player because that's what his value is as a gunner, and he's great at that. But how many years do you keep him? Because if you start looking at the other guys you have coming, waiting in the wings, again, probably not going to make the team this year. But if he has a strong camp, I could see him making the practice squad and maybe a name to keep in mind as the season goes on or next year. Keep in mind what we had to do last year at cornerback. We're playing Trayvon Mullins, Mackenzie Alexander, Rose. We're just signing any guy we can and throwing him out there over some of the other guys that we drafted high. So I think cornerback's kind of an interesting position too. Safety is exciting because Cowboys Nation's been begging for safeties for years, and we actually have 5 safeties now that we all feel pretty good about. So,
man, hey, probably the best safety room. Listen, I don't want anybody out there thinking it's hyperbole or hyperbole or however y'all like to pronounce it because we country down here, but you can't really find a better cornerback room than J-Ron Curse, Donovan Wilson, Malik Hooker. Then you go 4 deep. Like I said, position flex, you go 4 deep with Izzy. And then they're very high on Marquise Bell. So right. we got a great safety room too. So I don't know, man. I don't think there's really a defensive position, that I have question marks at outside of maybe linebacker. And even then, some of that is mitigated by the fact that we play so much big nickel. Even in those sets, J-Ron Curse already got the green dot. So,
right.
He technically is your middle linebacker. If you just think about his function on the defense.
Yeah, I mean, linebacker is, in my opinion, the obvious positional group on the defensive unit that you can look at and say, some question marks there, some health issues too. What are they going to look like? If they have to play a lot of base. But the good news in the NFL is you don't play a lot of base. Teams base defense is nickel, and then they're using dime. And one thing that I like to nickel. Yeah, and then when you add in dime, it's like 92% of the overall snaps or something like that is what teams are playing. So when we talk about 11 and 12 personnel on the offensive side, I think it's a good time to bring up what the defenses do when you're an 11 personnel, which is why offensive coordinators that are smart can use that to their advantage. So when you're in 11 personnel, defenses are in base formation 2.8% of the time. 2.8%. That's crazy because the league's running 11 personnel about 70% of the snaps, meaning overall you're not playing a lot of base just from that. But when you play 12 personnel, you're in base defense 49.5% of the time. So just under, we'll just call it 50% of the time. That's a huge difference. So now I know if I'm in 12 personnel, you have an extra linebacker on the field, probably 50% of the time, I can attack you in the passing game now because I'm going to get a linebacker either in zone coverage or in man, and that's a mismatch most of the time in the NFL. So that's where smart offensive play callers can kind of use that to their advantage, and I'm going to dictate what you do. Because if you play nickel or dime against my 12 personnel, I now have the size advantage and I'll run the ball. And if you play base, I'm going to throw the ball on you. Kelvin didn't really do that. We're lining offensive guards up at fullback and sitting Terrence Steele and passing routes.
Man, thank God. And listen, I pray that he's successful over there, right? I don't want anybody to fail, but the God knows I'm glad that man's gone. He was listening, and I really feel this. He was calling plays trying to get a head coaching job. Like right now, I think like Mike McCarthy's a made man. He already won his Super Bowl. He's already respected as a head coach. He's just trying to go out there and win by any means necessary, in my opinion. So I think it's going to be a different philosophy. I don't think there's going to be a lot of pretty, double reverses and bulls on first down. So I think it's going to be a lot of no nonsense, football plays. So that's why I'm excited to see the Dallas Cowboys transition over to Mike McCarthy as the play caller. And a lot of people be sleeping on Big Mike. I really think it's because of the comments that Aaron Rodgers made. Like, oh man, he's behind on the times. He woo woo. But now he was with another offensive coordinator, another offensive head coach who's supposed to be a guru, and he slandered him on the way out the door. So, the common denominator is Aaron Rodgers. Because last time I checked, Mike McCarthy had a top 10 offense for 9 consecutive seasons.
Yeah. No, good. Yeah, exactly. I like Mike McCarthy. I feel like he gets a tough... the media narrative and the way that the fan base have kind of embraced him is rough. So... but I agree. One thing with Kellen Moore, kind of going back to that one, is those double reverses and things you talked about. Where those happen situationally is what was frustrating. They seem to happen a lot of times in the first half of games, second quarter, something like that. As soon as you cross the 50, you're on like the 35-yard line. That's when he rolls out this trick play, and now you lose yardage and you're in punting situations at that point. So I don't think you'll see a lot of that with Mike. One thing I do want to see that we didn't talk about earlier, we talked about play action, is I want to see more pre-snap motion in general with this offense. That's something that we saw in the Indianapolis game. CeeDee Lamb was in motion like 70-something% of the snaps, and then the next week it was gone. It was just like he forgot about it, which was crazy. So that's something I don't care if it's Mike McCarthy or Schottenheimer or the combination of them calling plays. I need to see more pre-snap motion because it's going to give you a pretty good tell if they're in man or zone, which helps you in the passing game. It also sets the defense up at the last second differently than what they were planning on. So I would love to see more pre-snap motion in general, going along with the running inside zone concepts, getting the offensive lineman in space, moving to the next level, and the mesh concepts, dagger routes, shallow crosses, China concepts, and all those type of things we're going to see in the offense that we haven't seen before or haven't seen enough of. I think the offense should be in pretty good shape. It's all going to come down to the help of the offensive line.
Right, I agree with you on that. And one of the reasons I'm happy they're moving to a West Coast offense is because it's really an offense that's predicated on the drop of the quarterback. The timing of the wide receivers, getting proper depth on your routes, and we all know that Dak Prescott, from a standpoint of processing the game, pre-snap, and post-snap, really is one of the best quarterbacks in doing that in the NFL. So that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of them want to see more motion. Like Dak Prescott is already good at analyzing the defense pre-snap. Giving him a couple more tails is always a good thing for you. But one of the things I really want them to get back to is something that they really haven't done since Kellen Moore became the offensive play caller, is let Dak Prescott run the ball in red zone situations. That man went from averaging 6 rushing touchdowns a year his first 3 seasons to he might get 1 in the season. So utilize him as a red zone threat, especially with how the spacing is down there in the red zone, is very critical to me. So listen, I don't want him like Jalen Hurts. That boy runs the ball over 11 times a game. But if you let Dak Prescott run the ball 3 or 4 times a game just to keep the defense honest, I would love that.
No, I 100% agree with that. And that's something that we should see. I mean, look at what Philadelphia did last year with their quarterback sneaks. Like, Dak's a big dude. Do you remember when Dak came back from his injury? He had the rushing touchdown and said he had to remind them that he was a big MFer. Like, Dak's body type, like, he can sustain, goal line situation carries, short yardage situation, sneaks, like things like that to, convert first downs and kind of impose the will on the defense. So I would love to see that. I completely agree with you. I don't want to see him running, 10 to 15 times a game or anything like that. But 4 or 5 carries, that are timed correctly, I think could really put a lot of stress on the defense.
Right. And listen, remember, you spoke about the inside zone. A lot of those RPO concepts look just like the inside zones. You can marry all that stuff together. You can marry a quarterback keeper with that. You can marry a true run pass option with that. Right. So, there's a lot of things you can do conceptually wise to make all that stuff look alike. And first and foremost, hey, shout out to Dunny Holmes for the $10 donation that actually got you a raffle entry to win this Dallas Cowboy game ticket to Dallas Cowboys Philadelphia home game. So salute to you. And if anybody wants to improve their odds of winning the ticket, just hit the Cash App or hit the super chats or super stickers. But yeah, man, and that's one of the things though, man. Like, I did not feel good about this team last season going no, in the off season, right? We lost Amari Cooper, we lost Cedric Wilson. A lot of people don't even bring his name up. We lost 3 touchdowns from Malik Turner. He was a nice little complimentary wide receiver. So we lost all that offensive production and we replaced it with James Washington. And like say, hey, Noah Brown gonna be your number. What you mean? So like just from that, just from where we were last year to how I feel right now this year, going in with the personnel that we have, knowing the kind of concepts we're planning to run, and then like hell, and keeping Dan Quinn. Like, I did not expect for Dan Quinn to be here this long. I expected him to have a head coach job really after the first season, but the fact that he's still here, the fact that we improved our offensive personnel overall, and we even invested in defensive tackle. We've been a bottom of the pack, run stopping team for the past couple of years, like 22nd last year, if I'm not mistaken. So I think a lot of these moves are going to pay dividends. So I'm really excited to see what the new season brings, man. But before we get out of here, I do want to ask your opinion though of the run defense. Do you think acquisitions like Mozzie Smith, and being able to retain the services of Jonathan Hankins are going to serve dividends?
Yeah, definitely. I was not expecting, and obviously we will see if this is actually going to come to fruition, but I was not expecting them to heavily implement Hankins and Mozzie together. I thought situationally we would see that, but in training camp so far, not training camp, but in mini camp so far, that was something they said that they ran quite a bit. So that's interesting. But yeah, if you look at what Hankins did last year when he was on the field, his plus minus differential, which is the difference of him being on the field, what we allowed from yards per carry versus when he was off the field, it was like 0.8 yards different. That's crazy. It's crazy. You're talking about almost the difference of a full yard when this guy's on the field. So you add him to the unit, and then you have Mozzie Smith. I mean, that definitely is going to help the run game, or the run defense, I should say. And then if Leighton Vander Esch is healthy, obviously that's going to help too. He's a name that Cowboys Nation kind of soured on, myself included, but last year played pretty well, and he's back this year. So we saw the difference of when he was not there versus when he was there. And then you get Damone Clark back for a full year this year. He didn't have the offseason last year with his surgery recovery, missed all of training camp, and then came out and played pretty well considering the circumstances just being thrown out there. And now he'll be on the field with LVE. He'll be on the field with a Mozzie Smith in front of him and a Hankins in front of him, and he's going to probably take his team to the next level too. So I definitely think we'll see an improvement. How much improvement remains to be seen, but yeah, we should definitely be better in run defense this year.
But yeah, man, I appreciate you for coming through the liquor store and showing love, man. I know that you did not have that much time. We actually went overtime, so I appreciate you for tapping in with me, man. But let everybody know where they can find you at, though, on the way out, my guy.
Yeah, sounds good. Once again, I appreciate you having me on, man. It was a lot of fun. Just definitely run this back and do it. Training camp and the season starts whenever, anytime. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Professor_O_NFL. I write for Cowboys Wire, USA Today, mostly data analytical articles. I do write draft profiles and things like that too in draft season. And then you can find me on Picks It Sports. We should be launching our show next Wednesday and next Friday. And then when the season gets rolling, we'll have Wednesday, Friday shows going again. But again, chat, appreciate you guys rocking with us. Definitely make sure you like, follow, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And get in that raffle, man. You get to go to the Eagles game, Cowboys-Eagles game on Henny for $10. That's a steal. Make sure to buy some raffle tickets. But appreciate you guys. Catch you next time.
Indeed. And hey, y'all already know, man, if y'all see an Eagles fan in the middle of the road, I would tell y'all drink and drive responsibly, but you see one in the middle of the road, you got my permission to run that goofy ass over. Peace and God bless.